All right, so this lesson is going to be the last way to learn for solving a quadratic equation. So you've got, up until this point, you should have the graphing method, the factoring method, and the completing the square method. So the quadratic formula will be the last method. And in my opinion, it's probably the best way. So it's something I would choose to use this to solve almost any of the quadratics, unless they can be easily factored. If they can be easily factored, then I probably choose factoring. But otherwise, I probably revert to using this formula. So to use the formula, you've got to remember what a standard form for a quadratic is, and it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So if you have a quadratic, let's make an equation here. 2x squared minus 4x plus 7 equals 0. Okay, so we said solve that. Your a would be 2, your b would be negative 4, and your c would be 7. Okay, another example here. Remember, just like any other method of solving a quadratic, you should have equals to 0 first, so you should move everything to the left side. So if we had something like this, we would have to subtract the 4x to the left side and also subtract the 8 to the other side. And so in that case, your a is 1, your b is negative 4, and your c is negative 8. So you do have to make sure everything is moved to the left before you identify what a, b, and c are. All right, so let's just jump right into it. Let's use the formula here. So again, this just talks about what a, b, and c are, what I just talked about. A is called quadratic term, b is the linear term, and c is the constant term. I'm not going to watch it a little bit. Okay, so here is an example. So in this case, we should have a is 1, b is 6, it's a terrible 6, and c is negative 16. Okay, and so what we're going to do is going to substitute those three numbers into the formula. Okay, so formula is up there in the top right-hand corner. So we got negative b, which is negative 6, plus or minus the square root of, and we got b squared, so that's 6 squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. And since a is 1 and it's 2 times 1, I'm just going to leave a 2 down there at the bottom. All right, so the hardest part of this formula is probably the first step right after this. So once we substitute everything in, it's not that bad. It's just properly using the calculator to simplify this down. So I have to get out of here so I can open the calculator up. So here's the calculator. So we had, so what I like to do is I like to find out what number's underneath the square root first. So I like to type all the stuff underneath the square root in the calculator first. So that is 6 to the second power minus 4 times 1 times negative 16. Hit enter. Okay, so that's 100. So then I like to go, let's get back here. So I like to go and I like to change that number then to 100. So I just did everything underneath the square root and it was the number 100. So then I just go to this step. Okay, and then next step I like to do is just find the square root of 100. And if you need to use the calculator to do that, go for it. The square root of 100 is just a 10. Okay, and then once you get to this step, this is where you have your two solutions. All right, so first solution is going to be using the positive. So that's negative 6 plus 10. Negative 6 plus 10 is 4, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2. So one of our solutions is a 2. And then in the other, I like to say, okay, well, what if it's negative 10? So negative 6 minus 10 is negative 16, and then divide that by 2, and you get negative 8. All right, so we've got our two solutions right there, 2 and negative 8. Again, you can always check your work by using the calculator. So if you click the calculator here, go to y equals, you type in your equation. So in this case, we had an x squared plus 6x minus 16. Look at the graph, and what you should see is you should see the graph crossing the x-axis at the two numbers that you found, the two solutions. So at 2 and negative 8, and that's what we see. If you count over, this crosses at 2, and the one on the left here crosses at -8. So there you have your two solutions. So to be honest, probably factoring method would have been way faster. We could have factored this into x plus 8x minus 2 and then had our solutions pretty quick. But again, not every quadratic can be factored. So sometimes you have to use a different method, like the quadratic formula. So in this case, we're not going to identify a, b, and c yet because we do not have equals to 0. So this 9 has to be moved over to the left side. So it has to be added to both sides. And so we got x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Now we can figure out what a, b, and c are. A would be 1, b is -6, and c is positive 9. Then we're going to substitute into our formula here. Negative b. B is already -6, so we should make this a positive 6. And you do have to be careful right at this step. So our b is -6, and we are squaring that. So when you use the calculator, you've got to put parentheses around your -6. All right, so then we got 4. Our formula says 4 times a times c. A is 1, and c is 9. All over 2 times a. And a is 1, so I'm just going to leave that as a 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so when we type this in the calculator here, let's exit out of full screen. We have -6, but remember, I got to put that in parentheses. So parentheses -6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. And I think we're going to get 0. Yeah, so we get 0 there. All right, so my next step would be to write down everything. Okay, and we just did the number underneath the square root and found out it was a 0. Okay, the square root of 0 is 0. So this is 6 plus or minus 0 over 2. Okay, and there's actually only going to be one solution here. All right, because if I do 6 plus 0, that's 6. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So 3 is a solution. And then if I do the minus, 6 minus 0, that's still 6. And 6 divided by 2 is still 3. So in this case, we would only have one solution, and it would be a 3. Again, I can verify that using my calculator. Whoops, let's go back here. If I type that into y equals, when you type it in, again, you're going to have this equals to 0. So we'd be typing in x squared minus 6x plus 9 plus 9. Okay, hit the graph, and again, it should cross the x-axis at 3, I think is the solution we found, and you can see this thing bottoms out right at 3. You could also find that by looking at the table. So if we hit second graph, we could find out when it hit the x-axis. We would be looking for when y is 0. So here's the point right here. 3, 0, that's the only solution. So, and then the last example I'm going to cover here, you can see from the description here, it's a non-real answer, which means it's no solutions. And I just want to show you what that looks like. All right, so we're already ready to identify a, b, and c. A is 1, b is 0, and c is 9. So we plug those into the formula. We have negative b, which is 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 0, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Okay, so there's our setup. This is 0. And then again, I just go to the calculator. I type in everything that's underneath the square root. So in this case, that would be, and I know what 0 squared is, but I'm just going to do it the same way I did. Why is this not working? There we go. 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9, which is -36. Okay, so we get -36. Fine and dandy. So we go back to our work. We write the next step. X equals 0 plus or minus the square root of -36 all over 2. And then you try to figure out what the square root of -36 is. And that's where your problem is. If you use the calculator to do these, it will tell you. So square root of -36, it will tell you non-real answer, which is funny because this says non-real example. Non-real means it's there's no real solution, so there's no numbers that work. We're not going to go over what imaginary numbers are because that's what this is. But that's a non-real answer, so you could stop there and you could write no real solutions. And then that would be it. All right, so anytime you get a negative underneath the square root, we're going to have no real solutions. Anytime you have a positive number underneath the square root, you're going to get two solutions. And then the example that we just did on the previous slide was an example where we had one solution, so this one. And if you remember from that example, the number that was underneath the square root was a 0. So not that you have to remember that, but that's when you're going to have one solution. So you have one solution when the number you get underneath the square root is a 0. All right, so that's how you do those. Let me go over one more example. Let me make one up here. Let's duplicate this one. Plus 5, and let's do, I don't know, minus 8. Okay, so let's do this one. I plug my numbers in my formula. By the way, these are not going to get me perfect numbers, whole numbers. So that's why I'm trying to do an example that you don't get whole numbers. All right, so plug them into our formula. Negative b is negative 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All right, so then go to the calculator. Write everything underneath the square root here. So that's a 5 squared minus 4 times a times c, and c was negative 8. So we get 57. Nice. That's what I was looking for. All right, so we get negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 57 all over 2. All right, and then your next step would be to simplify the square root of 57. That doesn't necessarily work out well because the square root of 57 is a decimal. It's 7.55. All right, so for now, this answer is good enough, all right, because you can't simplify it any further. So this does show that there's two solutions because you have a plus or minus in here, so you have two of them. If you have to approximate what the number is, all right, you could do negative 5 plus, and then you could use this decimal to approximate. So if that was the case, if I needed to find out what these two solutions were, I could do negative 5 plus the square root of 57, which is this 7.5 number here, plus 7.5498, and then divided by my 2 that's in my solution there. And so one of my answers is 1.27. So one of them is approximately 1.27. That's an estimate. It's rounding the answer. And then the other one is when I subtract. So I have negative 5 minus the square root of 57, which is, again, is this 7.55 number, or 7.5498 divided by 2. And so we get these two solutions. What is that? Negative 6.27. Negative 6.27. All right, so there's your two solutions if you wanted them as, decimal form, or leaving it like this is just fine. And again, we can check our work here. So let's go type in our equation, make sure that these two are where it crosses the x-axis at. So put plus 5x minus 8. Hit graph, and hopefully, so 1.27 is the point right here on the right. It's in between 1 and 2. And then negative 6.27 is the one that's over here on the left side. So looks good. That's using the quadratic formula. And thanks for watching.